Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a comic book, graphic novel that I read, one that is about superheroes and normal people trying their hand at superheroism. I am referring to Kick-Ass by Mark Millar and with art by John Romita Jr. Here is the cover, and here is the back cover with Kick-Ass climbing up a ladder. It's a pretty interesting comic book. I have a lot to say about it. I got this from my local library, so don't forget to patronize your local libraries. For those that don't know, Mark Millar is a pretty big name in comic books, as is John Romita Jr. I believe I've read some of some comics before with his artwork. But Mark Millar is somewhat responsible for the Civil War storyline that happened in the mid-2000s, where Captain America and Iron Man went on separate sides for the Superhero Registration Act, and then they proceeded to fight and attempt to push their policies through, and they also used Spider-Man in the process to get people on their side, because Spider-Man is very relatable. The comic is somewhat well regarded and also somewhat hated. Well regarded in the sense that it had high stakes and it shifted the comic book landscape afterwards. But it's also kind of hated because it was seen as kind of edgy, and it made a lot of comic book characters act in ways that weren't reasonable. Like they suddenly had a violent side even if they didn't have one before. Not the most well regarded, but also a lot of people see it as very influential, and it led to the Civil War movie that was released in 2016, which I thought was pretty good. Millar has also written Wanted, which is a comic book that was later turned into a movie about assassins who can bend bullets and stuff, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And he's also written Kick-Ass, so a pretty big name in the comic book industry. I was a big fan of the movie version of Kick-Ass, so I wanted to check out to see if the inspiration held up at all. So we'll find out. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Kick-Ass focuses on the character of Dave Lazowski. He is a teenager in high school who's a comic book nerd, also somewhat unpopular as he can't get the ladies to pay attention to him. Because he's so interested in comic books, he asks his friends what would happen if an ordinary person tried to be a superhero. Is that even possible? Why hasn't anyone tried it? And they tell him that it's probably because ordinary people don't have the skills required to be a superhero. They would probably get their ass handed to them in a fight. And you're always coming up against people who have guns or knives or stuff like that. So considerably more dangerous than the average person. Dave understands that, but he also believes that maybe he could be the first person to try it out. So he gets a green wetsuit and starts patrolling his neighborhood looking for various crime. He gets somewhat of a high off of it because he's doing something that no one else is doing, wearing his wetsuit underneath all his clothes, filling him with some amount of confidence. One day he comes up against a graffiti artist who he challenges, believing that he could take them down. And he does get some good hits in. Unfortunately, they manage to beat him down and stab him. And then as he's wandering away, he's hit by a car, unfortunately, and ends up in the hospital. He gets metal plates in his head, which do allow him to withstand more pain down the road, although he's still getting punched in the head. So I don't know how safe that is. And he's somewhat discouraged from pursuing the superhero avenue for a little bit, but he comes to find out that he's kind of addicted to the rush, the adrenaline rush, stuff like that. So he ends up donning the superhero costume again and going out on patrol, and manages to save a helpless citizen from a gang getting beat up, but also defending himself in the process. And the gang runs away. He's videotaped. It goes onto YouTube. He develops a MySpace page as a result, and that's when his popularity goes through the roof, as more people want to know about Kick-Ass. This inspires a sense of confidence in him, and one day a person through his MySpace page asks him to check in on their stalker and make sure that he doesn't stalk anybody else. And so Kick-Ass does that. He checks out a guy named Eddie Lomas, who surrounds himself with other thugs who are dangerous people, and although he does manage to beat them up a little bit, they come back and almost kill him in the process. Luckily, he's saved by a costumed little girl wielding a sword, who kills everybody in the room. She leaves, and he follows to check them out and discovers that she's paired with an older adult man. They call themselves Big Daddy and Hit Girl, and Dave notes that they seem to be more serious than he is, because they have the appropriate weapons and tactics to use against this deadly force. And so it's eventually revealed that Hit Girl and Big Daddy are working against the Genovese crime family, as according to Big Daddy, their origin story is that he used to be a police officer and the Genovese asked him to be corrupt, but he decided that he wasn't going to do that, and so they murdered his wife and he went on the run, eventually plotting revenge against the Genovese. And so they're currently working to take down their operation, which makes the Genovese crime family somewhat upset in the process. Meanwhile, Kick-Ass runs into a superhero that he's inspired named Red Mist, who has some money at his disposal, is kind of laid back, and also a bit of a jerk when it comes to doing superhero things. They agree to work together for a little bit, and Kick-Ass agrees to take Red Mist back to meet Big Daddy and Hit Girl, but surprise, it's revealed to be a trap on the Genovese crime family, as Red Mist is the son of John Genovese. And so Big Daddy and Dave, Kick-Ass, are taken back to the compound for interrogation, where Kick-Ass gets his ass kicked, and Big Daddy is beaten near to death. And at this point, Big Daddy reveals that his backstory is not what he says it was. He was actually an accountant who grew bored with his accountant life, and he was obsessed with comic books, so he strove to become a superhero, kidnapping his own daughter in the process. And as a result, they targeted the Genovese crime family because, as Big Daddy notes, every story needs a villain, and John Genovese was just sitting there waiting to be a villain. They end up killing Big Daddy in the process. Luckily, Hit Girl shows up and saves Kick-Ass before they manage to kill him. And then they take on the Genovese at the compound, the family hideout, whatever it's called. And Dave gets some revenge on Red Mist in the process by knocking him out and killing pretty much the rest of the family. Hit Girl, who now goes by the name of Mindy, has been reunited with her mom and is happy to be a teenager again. Meanwhile, Dave feels that he's inspired other people to be superheroes. And Red Mist, at the end of the story, is writing to Dave on his computer, indicating that supervillains are going to rise as well, and they are going to take down Kick-Ass, find out his identity, and kill everyone he loves. So there's the promise of that, which I think would be fulfilled in the next volume, which I haven't read yet. In terms of analysis, I feel there's a bit to talk about with this story. One of the central questions at the heart of Kick-Ass is, can regular people be superheroes? And I think that Mark Millar effectively answers the question, yes, but it's incredibly dangerous and people aren't doing it for the right reasons. Incredibly dangerous in the sense that Dave gets stabbed, beaten up, kicked, hurt a lot in the process. He ends up in the hospital, and he regularly is seen wearing bandages and bleeding because he can't really hold himself in a fight. So maybe if you had the skill, the martial arts ability, the ability with weaponry and stuff that Hit Girl and Big Daddy had, maybe you could be a superhero. But Dave does not have that, so the regular person probably can't afford to be a superhero. But even Big Daddy suffers in this story because he's shot and killed, no matter what his abilities are, or what weapons he has, or how much he trains Hit Girl. They weren't able to defeat the Genovese when they first came after them because they had the advantage in numbers. And so it really seems like Millar is arguing that no, the superhero, you can't be a superhero. It's too dangerous, and you're going to end up shot or stabbed, and there's no... The only way you can truly be a superhero is if you have superhero abilities like flight or strength or durability, which Dave has to some extent, but it's too dangerous otherwise. And Dave is better off, just sticking to reading comic books, it would seem. Another thing that Mark Millar touches upon is the high of celebrity, the great feeling that comes with being, slightly more popular than you were before. Because at the start of the story, Dave, he's not well regarded, but he's also not strongly disliked. He's kind of in the middle where no one really pays attention to him. And the moment he gets the green wetsuit, he starts to feel slightly better. And once he actually succeeds in some of the superheroing, people pay attention to him, which causes him to want to do the kick-ass thing even more. He feels strongly compelled to go out and fight because the attention he gets. You could probably argue that many of the Marvel and DC heroes of yore would be attracted somewhat to this high of celebrity, that no matter how hard fighting evil gets, there's always the promise that someone will look up to you and say, hey, that person is pretty cool. And that's what Dave wants, and that also is seemingly what Red Mist wants, but it doesn't seem to be what Big Daddy or Hit Girl initially want as they're seeking vengeance, although that's later proven to be, not exactly true. So Millar touching upon the allure of fame that comes with being a superhero. So maybe not everybody who is doing the superheroing has the noblest of goals behind it. Another really fascinating aspect of this story is Big Daddy's character and how he kind of spends, Mark Millar kind of spends the notion of vengeance on its head by using this character throughout the story. So at the very start, when we find out about Big Daddy, we learn that his origin story is that his family was killed by the mob, and so he set about trying to get revenge by tracking down the Genovese crime family and taking them all out alongside his daughter. And I think Dave even notes that that's similar to what happened with the Punisher, where the Punisher's family was all killed, and so he became an anti-hero, seeking to deliver extreme justice to the villains in his life. Also kind of similar to Batman, where he's seeking vengeance for his family. So it seems like Big Daddy has that traditional background where he's just seeking vengeance. He wants to avenge his loved ones, and it turns out that's not actually the case. Later on, it's revealed that Big Daddy is just an accountant who was so obsessed with comic books, much like Dave, that he put on a costume and sought to fight vengeance and kidnapped his own daughter. An arguably terrible act by kidnapping his own daughter and forcing her to fight alongside him by telling her that the mafia killed her mom. So kind of an interesting spin and a way to make Big Daddy seem like a heinous, terrible person, and again challenging what we view as a superhero, because we have a person who's deluded themselves into thinking that they're the hero of their own story, and it ends up getting them killed in the process. So one of the better things that Mark Millar does in this story. However, as people have noted in the Civil War storyline, Mark Millar has a tendency to be too edgy and too violent for reasons that aren't entirely clear. Like, he just wants the story to be focused on adults. There's tons of blood, tons of action, and all the characters are super cool and say cool things. But it comes off as dated and too edgy, where it's clear that the writer is trying too hard to be cool, and it makes some of the dialogue, it dates some of the dialogue and makes it feel really cheesy at times. But that's not even the slightest of problems. The bigger problem is that it's homophobic, because one of the central plot points is that Dave is pretending to be gay in order to get closer to a girl. So already heinous writing right there. And misrepresenting the gay community. But there's also an extreme use of the word fag, which I don't like to say, but I felt I needed to get it out there. Extreme use of that word in order to disparage Dave for pretending to be gay, and it feels really weird, especially because this came out in 2008, and now like in 2020, it's advised that nobody really used that word. And then the story is also somewhat racist. And because it commonly uses people of color, especially black people, as the thugs that Dave meets in the street. And it seems really obvious, too, because the low-level villains are black people and the mafia people are white. And it's very, very odd, and like it's hard not to notice that that is kind of racist. And I just wonder what either John Romita Jr. or Mark Millar are trying to do here, as it doesn't help anybody. I will say that there is some comeuppance for Dave by pretending to be gay, because later Katie finds out and starts beating him up. But I'd say you don't really need that storyline at all. You can find some other way for Dave to get beat up for pretending to be something that gets him closer to Katie. It really drags down this story, and they included it in the movie version too, but eventually Dave proves that he's not gay, and Katie likes him for it, and it's just weird messages all around, and I don't think it holds up 12 years later. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Kick-Ass by Mark Millar and John Romita Jr., a fairly interesting collection or graphic novel, one that I enjoyed reading, and I liked the ideas that Mark Millar presented, but I felt that ultimately its desire to be edgy and cool and its homophobic and racist tendencies kind of dragged it down. So unfortunately, I'm not going to recommend it for you out there. I feel like there's a lot more comic books out there that have tried to do what Kick-Ass is doing, and they did it better. I can't think of those comic books at the time, but I'm sure they exist out there, and this is really skippable. I might check out the next volume in this collection, the sequel story, Kick-Ass 2, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that in the near future. So yeah, unfortunately, I liked it, but it's not good enough to recommend to people out there. If you've read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I said in my review, absolutely do that below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about edginess in comics or something like that. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about the works of Mark Millar. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and vigilante travels. Farewell.